the Oscars only matter to the people involved. Beyond that, they don't.
Yeah. I mean, listen, if I was a creative and something I did was upfront Oscar, I probably get up for it. But other than that, like,
yeah, because you'd be involved. So but that's what I mean. Like, only people who are actually involved with the Oscar, it matters in that regard because it's good for their careers or money or whatever. But I mean, beyond that, it doesn't really. It's not a metric anymore for high quality film like it used to. When they created that blockbuster category or whatever it was, that's when it all died.
So here's my thing.
Before that.
So like,
well, it was there before that, but it was on
that was the funeral.
That was when the flatlined when they did that.
Cam, before you give your Oscar treaty.
Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice.
Welcome everybody to Blerdlines. It's your man Cam. With me as always is
the Ramadan Cam. I'm going through it right now. Day 2. No food, no water. Let's go.
As well as.
Hey, this is Josh, the last forgotten son of Krypton, the black one.
As well, and bring up the rear.
It's the professor. It's D. What's up, everybody?
And if you haven't noticed, it's Oscar time, and we're recording this right as the Oscars are filming, and none of us actually are watching it. Why? Because none of us really care.
But it's important.
So here's my take, real quick, surface level take. I guess if you're an up and coming artist, actor, director, whatever, and I guess the Oscars can still do things for you if you're fresh on the scene. But like, say somebody like a Spike Lee wins one, it's not going to do anything extra to his career. It just adds something to his resume. If you've been watching some of these proclaimed directors and artists in general that are already established, the Oscar is just another thing on their checklist to brag about. Certain people who have a like mind to be like, okay, if I win an Oscar, cool. They're not going to say no for the most part. There's only a few people that'll be like, I'm not going, I'm not attending because they won an award. But like Spike Lee.
And fewer still who are like, nah, I don't want my Oscar. Yeah. So like part of it is like, you don't
like
have
Marlon Brando, perhaps.
Brando, he sent a Native American or an indigenous person to receive his award. But like for me personally, if I was already kind of established, made a name, but I'm already outspoken against the Oscars, I feel like it would be a slap in the face to all my moral ethics of what I've been talking to show up and receive this Oscar. And there's people who want to play the game and get the Oscar and it gets that notoriety. You do that. Because it's a cat and mouse thing. You know what I'm saying? Like an Oscar is still somewhat of a big deal. But again, we don't use that as the metric anymore to be like, that's a good director. That's a good movie. Like I said, if Moonlight didn't win, it wouldn't have never changed my opinion of the movie itself. I thought it was a great movie. It spoke to me on levels, but it won on some, it was just a theatrical mess of how it won, but it won cool. But it's not going to take away anything of how I feel about that movie. There's a lot of movies that didn't even get a sniff that I thought was just light years better, and vice versa. Sometimes the Oscars do get it right? So I'm not going to sit here and say they don't get it right all the time. They may pick something that was dope. Moonlight was one of them. I can't think of the Korean movie that Parasite won something. Yeah, Parasite. I thought that was an awesome movie, but again, the days of, in my opinion, the days of where people use the Oscars as a metric to say this is the best of the best, I think have been gone for a long time. And I think most of you guys, probably agree with that assessment.
Yeah, I would say, that, the thing I would think is it's an award show, right? So we all know award shows are, you're just patting yourself on the back for the things you do. It still feels good to win, but it kind of like what Cam was saying, the era of, you're a Oscar nominee, actor doesn't have the same weight it might have had 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Because I mean, and it doesn't take away from it, but I think it's like the awards don't feel on a level of grandiose that used to be. And even nowadays, we have the Oscars is usually the last one that usually goes, because Kieran Culkin won for Best Supporting Actor, but he had already won for Golden Globes, BAFTAs, Critics Awards, SAG Awards. So it's kind of like almost like a clean sweep type of a situation. So there's a point where Oscars come out and we're kind of just like, oh, all right, have I seen that film? No, probably haven't. Or maybe I have, but in general, it didn't have the same feel. Where before it'd be like, oh, this is the best. These are the 10 best pictures of the year. Then you would go back and be like, oh, maybe I should watch these because someone is telling me that these are good. Nowadays, you see that list, you're just kind of like, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's contextual, right? Like we were saying before we started, or when we started, rather. If I'm a filmmaker and I'm up for one, then yeah, I'm all hyped for it, sure. But if I'm not, then the context shifts drastically, because the show, the award show itself, the ratings are consistently down, which speaks to the production itself. Like, it used to be, even if you didn't necessarily care about who was nominated, or you didn't agree with who was going to be nominated and who was the projected winner, you still would watch just to see the spectacle, like the show, the award show itself. And now the shine of even that is not as interesting, and then, if it wasn't the spectacle of the show, it was the host. Okay, well, so-and-so is hosting. Cool. I'm gonna watch for that person. So all of those things are now kind of, they have less cachet, less value for a lot of people. I'm not just speaking for this group, because I think we're just jaded old men who worked in the industry in different capacities and have a different outlook on things. But just in general, like the average viewer, like friends that I know that used to have Oscar drinking parties and Oscar watch parties, they're not on it like that anymore, because it's not the same. Like, for them, it's not, at least, and I would imagine for the larger viewing public, it's not the same. Like, it doesn't ring the same for them, coupled with the fact that, you have all sorts of mishaps and just like, voting, these weird voting swings where one year, no women directors, or no black women or no women of color, or all white women are nominated for Best Actress. And in another year, they swing real hard in the opposite direction. And, it's all over the place.
Yeah. And I think also, too, award shows in general, and that's just the ratings things in general. Every single award show has been going specifically down every year. It's been like that for basically the last 10 years. So less and less people are tuning in. So it hasn't had that same level of the quote unquote normies aren't super into it as much as they used to be.
Let me add this, though. If someone has a party and food, I'll go.
Yeah, of course.
So.
Yeah. I also think it's more indicative of a larger zeitgeist, a spirit of the times, in which the Oscars is an institution, and that's the Academy is an institution. And so now we live in an age, in an era, where culturally institutions are being challenged every which way and up, whether it be, political institutions or governmental institutions, or even entertainment institutions, where you have the Academy Awards that's undergone all these different disingenuous transformations over time to survive the current. Now it just doesn't matter as much anymore, because you have an entire generation that's growing up that doesn't care at all about any part of it, whether it be the spectacle, whether it be the fashion, whether it be the movies themselves. They don't participate in it, and it doesn't hold any kind of prestige for them. And also, in addition to that, it's harder to assess the overall quality of films in the whole pot when so many are being made in a year's time. And most of what the Oscar focuses on are films that are being made by people with financial backing, whether it's small or large. They have some money to put their film together and create it and put it out there and to be judged by the Academy. And again, that's a part of that institution. So the spirit of the times have changed and shifted, and the Oscars are starting to get left behind. It's going to happen to most of those award shows and most of the institutions that existed when we were growing up or when we were younger, that were the big thing, like you said, people organizing parties and games and pools at work and all that stuff. That's going away, and that's just going to be how it is. They'll still have Oscars will still come on, and it'll be just like this. Maybe you'll get a group of people who are excited, and then you'll probably get more that just don't care. So, and the ratings are showing that.
I want to piggyback on a point you just made. You know, the award show doesn't seem to update with the times. Like, they're very slow to move, to latch on to new innovations, new thought processes, you know, and the blockbuster category, like you say, was one of those things that was just like, how disingenuous do you really want to be? Like, you know, like if
well, that's Disney putting its little money pause on things, because I'm not saying that they're paying anybody, but I'm also not saying that they're not, because most of the films and stuff that even in the Emmy categories for TV, the stuff that, you know, they making is getting nominated in the categories that would have never been on those ballots before. The Mandalorian,
right?
Like,
well, and again,
Star Wars films, never.
And again,
like not all
and again,
Star Wars.
That speaks to the previous point that I made in terms of ad campaigns. Like, now, if you have the money to campaign and advertise and keep your joint, you know, keep your project in the theater longer, or reintroduce it right before Oscar time, or send out screener links, you know, to the academy at large. Like, if you can afford to have like a server dedicated to, you know, running 24/7 the film that's going to be the films that you have in your portfolio that are going to be nominated, you know, you're at a bigger advantage than a smaller film that just squeaked in that everybody likes but isn't able to campaign as well or whatever. Like, it's just, the whole thing is very jaundiced also.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, it's the advertising aspect of it, because I think, you know, again, if you're up for an Oscar, you get an Oscar, that shit's still dope. Like, as the actor, as a person that does this, that in the craft and all that, if you're in that space, whether you're a filmmaker, whether you're an actor, you're a writer, you know, fashion and all that, getting recognized for your creative, getting recognized for your work, still dope, regardless. But however, a lot of the things, especially when it comes to the, you know, it is that advertising arm now, right? Because, oh, please give us a consideration because of X. The Emmys is the same way. The Grammys are the same way. And so it's one of those things where now, to Dee's point, you know, they have it so much more media is being made without these big budgets and these studios. And that's, again, you have a Netflix show or a movie that essentially has the most nominations of any movie of all time, or some craziness like that. Does it deserve that? Who knows? But you're now seeing the big crazy studios not giving that same shine that they used to get, and these other people starting to be able to make these things. So I think it's one of those things where, you know, the also just recently passed was the NAACP Awards, the Image Awards or whatever. And so it's much like when we used to work at BET and the BET Awards, it was always so super interesting for me, because I was kind of like, I was curious to see, do people care about the BET Awards within the industry, right? And it's a mixed bag, right? Some people care more for the camaraderie, being able to see, you know, their peers. Some people don't really care about the award themselves. It's more about the parties. But from the average person, from the regular person, do they care about watching and showing up and what happens to those types of things, right? So it's a very interesting spot, because award shows in general, we all know what they're about, but it is about recognition between that, you know, artistic situation. But like Josh said, like you said, Are you getting all the screeners and that ad you see on YouTube to say, hey, don't forget your consideration for X movie that you've never seen before and don't care about?
I will say this.
Also, it's a thing about. I'm sorry, I just wanted to add that it's in addition to the institutional aspect, the Academy and many of these award shows are about professional colleagues picking the best in their fields. So it's hardly ever about the people, the audience that are watching. And I think that's another aspect that now, as institutions are being scrutinized closely, that has caught on. Of that understanding is there. That there is no field of voting for people to vote for Oscars. There is a small group of people who represent the professional cadres or cabals within the media industry, and those people choose who they feel are the best in those categories. That's why it's an institution. And it's worth
noting. And it's worth noting that their criteria is not the general public's criteria.
Exactly. Yep.
Cam, you're gonna say something?
Yeah. Okay. So, being somewhat biased, once the curtain was peeled back as I gotten older, I understood.
Somewhat?
The curtain. Oh, yeah, somewhat biased. Being in the industry for a small period of time, knowing people in the industry for a long period of time, and starting to get privy to information about how the Oscars were working and how certain films got picked and chosen and watched and reviewed, it's an unfair process. As a kid, before I even got any whiff of being behind or in front of the camera, I would watch the Oscars to root for anybody I just liked as a movie star. You know, when Denzel was up, I'm like, hey, I'm watching, support my Black people, whatever. However, I've become a little bit more intimate with the process of protecting the culture and understanding, like, even though it's a Black film, if it's bad, I'm going to critique it as much because we have to do better on one aspect. But at the same time, I want my people to win. But if it's like not a good movie, I'm going to look at that and be like, I'm not supporting that. Then I start understanding, like, hey, this small group of individuals who watch these movies don't watch every movie. So how can I have a fair assessment of everything that's been out there and say, whatever I watch is the best without giving fair shake to the other movies? Like, there was a point where
added to that is that they don't, not only do they not watch everything, but their pool is small that is sent to them in the first place. It's not like, okay, from January 1st to this date, all the films that were made and stamped and whatever, we're giving all of you screeners of all of this stuff, and you decide out of the features, out of the shorts, out of the experimental, out of all of that, what is the best in terms of these different categories. No, it's like they have certain ones that submit to them, and they then put those in the pool, and then they select. And the they that I'm talking are, again, directors, actors, and not just any directors, actors, producers, and but
the voting eligible members of the Academy.
We're talking at the very highest level. We're talking about people, names like Steven Spielberg, like names like Martin Scorsese, names like you can throw them all out there, like Catherine Bigelow. Like, these individuals are the ones who vote for their colleagues' films or not.
I was going to also add, there used to be some respectability to the SAG awards because it was the actors, giving credence to their peers. But even, all these awards are I don't want to say a sham, but like, it's just to the fact
there's something about forget, so that we don't sound like crotchety old men who just never accomplished anything. Maybe it's worth going through. Like, there's a specific. I don't, because the judging criteria is a whole Einstein formula by itself. I don't think we should get into the weeds on that. But in terms of the general voting process, the overarching, I think is worth getting into, at least for the Oscars, so that people understand, like I have one particular friend who's probably listening, who constantly rails about the films and the actors who should have, that he felt, or the general public perhaps felt, should have won because of XYZ 1, 2, 3. And D'Angelo and I have had very molecular level conversations about this. And I think D'Angelo is the most qualified to sort of break down what that criteria is. I'm going to throw to him because I think he'll do it better justice than I will.
Well, there is a criteria of that, is accepted in terms of canon that individuals who study film like myself, or degrees in film or making films, understand, cinematography, key points and directing and things like that. Because I never judged any Oscar nominations, I can't say specifically what they're told to look for. So then it comes down to whatever the individual's taste is in each of those categories, the writing, the directing, the style, and the editing, because it's narrowed down and you began to look at it for just those things. So I would imagine, just using an educated guess, that each category, again, if you are a judge and you're being fair, you will only look at the editing for those individuals who are nominated in their films. You're now just looking at editing, because if you're trying to look at it and judge it all in the pot, you're going to probably misinterpret something or miscategorize or unfairly judge one thing or another. So if I'm just thinking about the writing, I'm looking at narrative structure, how each act flows from the opening to the end, the whether or not there's rising tension, character development, world building, things like that. In terms of cinematography, you're looking at the consistency of what's called mise en scène, which is how does lighting and how does everything in the frame also then tell the story, whether it be figuratively or literally. For example, Do the Right Thing, there's a lot of red and sepia tone shots, because the story is that not only is it summertime, there's a heat wave, but there's rising racial tension. So those layers and those things end up becoming, okay, who is knocking at the highest brow of these categories? I mean, who is producing or making, for example, a story, a script that takes the three-act structure, takes the narrative themes, the world building to another level, to a different level that isn't just run-of-the-mill average screenplay that you read and it leaves no mark on you. For example, Chinatown is one of the greatest screenplays of all time. It sets the bar for the neo-noir coming out of the black and white detective noir era with the Maltese Falcon and things like that. Chinatown had the same kind of impact, but in a different way at a different time. And Chinatown screenplay did win, if I'm not mistaken. I know it was nominated for an Oscar back when it was released. But all that to say is that I'm sure those who were judging Chinatown have a different set of standards. Maybe they derive from all these things I just said, because all of these things are basically how we understand film form and sense. And so when those things are at their highest quality, that's ideally what should be what the Oscars accept and how it should be judged. But we're talking about humans, and we're talking about the human condition, which when you put that involved into exactly, and that plus plus, again, human condition, who knows what passes as criteria for Oscar films, because look at the film that we're talking about, the what is it, Anna Maria something,
Amelia Perez. Amelia Perez.
Oh, but yeah,
Amelia Perez. I want to hit on something that you and I discussed that I think is of supreme importance, that I don't think so. All that you said is accurate, and I think that bears saying. But there was something specific that you hit on that sort of altered my way a few years ago. That sort of altered my way of looking at how the Academy judges in terms of format. You were talking about prestige format versus everything else, and how everything else may trickle in, but prestige format specifically is what usually almost 9.9 times out of 10 is what will get the attention of the Academy and thus rise, sort of bubble to the top of the pot in terms of the films that are out there. And usually a prestige format film is what will rise to the top in terms of nomination and then go on to win. But I want you to talk about what makes a prestige format film and how that informs not only Best Picture, but usually the Best Actor award, whether it be actor or actress, and sometimes director. And just touch on that for a little bit. I don't want to make this a class, but I
also,
feel like it bears saying. I feel like it is worth saying because I think people don't make those distinctions. I know I didn't.
Yeah, and I think also too, there's say for instance, how come a comedy doesn't get nominated for a Best Picture or a Best Director or something like that? Why? How come a sci-fi film like Dune, right. But Dune had a certain level of prestige. There you go. But there's an interesting mix where I see going back to do we have our film nerds? Do we have our regular people? Because not for nothing, the Best Picture is actually the picture that gets the most votes out of the 10,000 individuals that get to vote, right? And you don't have to watch. The criteria for being part of the voting thing is you don't have to watch every film. You could only vote on the things that you care about. So even though there's 10,000 members that votes, not everyone votes in every single category. Some people just care about the ones they do, and then they keep it moving. And voting's only.
Yeah, and you can have a situation where one film out of that 10,000 may have drawn the attention or the liking of 800 people out of the 2,000 that voted that year or whatever it is, but anyway, to use Dune Part 2 as an example, I think Dune has a science fiction fantasy setup. If you strip away from all of the things that make it special, it's a story about a prodigy with mental abilities who's a noble and loses everything but comes back from exile to claim a throne. And I mean, we've seen that story a lot of times in different ways and across many different genres. But for Dune, you have all of these things coming together that make almost an ethereal, sublime experience, right? So I was talking a lot about Hans Zimmer's score and just how beautiful it is in comparison to the balance that it creates with the visual that we're seeing. There's a scene where Paul and Chani are just sitting on a mound of sand talking, and I don't know the instrument that he uses for the melody, but it plays very strongly, but doesn't interfere with what's happening in the visual. It actually creates a new experience in addition to the cinematography and the performances between the two actors and the directing. So what creates a prestige film, it's always different, but it largely comes from when, yes, you have something that fits into a genre, but then it also doesn't fit into that genre because of all of the elements that come together that bring it together. The writing, Dune is also less about lasers and spaceships. I mean, how much time do they actually spend in space in Dune? It's less about Paul might have mental powers, but he's not, flying around or, having these big duels with other characters and, using his powers to lift them up and throw them across the room. It's more about the philosophical nature of the prophet or the leader that creates the phenomenon that is Muad'Dib. And so all of those things, the themes, the structure, the boldness, the scale, the scope, all of those things, when they come together, they create something that transcends genre. It transcends the story itself, right? So it becomes something bigger than just a film about sandworms and
space slugs and sand.
I'll say this.
And space addicts.
For me personally, I feel like movies that win awards, in essence, regardless of the genre, are movies that have some impact on you. For the most part, it could be a Marvel movie, it could be whatever,
or at least they should.
That's the idea, right?
Well, think about The Dark Knight. To your point, think about that. It's hard for people to call that a superhero film. And most people can't just call it a superhero film because it's doing a lot more. It's operating on multiple modes of production. It's a superhero film, but it's also it's also a story about a vigilante. It's a story about it has a gangster story feel to it at the very beginning, and the way that it's put together and the way that it builds a story with consequences and irreversible stakes is much different than what most superhero stories concoct or they create.
Yeah.
So then would you call the Dark Knight, any of the Dark Knight films or the Dark Knight trilogy in and of itself, prestige format as a result?
I would only call it the Dark Knight film itself, just the Dark Knight.
Just the middle.
I would categorize in that. Yeah, I wouldn't say that about Batman because of The Dark Knight Rises, but I do think that Nolan kept that consistency. It peaked with The Dark Knight.
I was going to say, to my original point, movies that have an impact, like, it can range from anywhere. And one of the few movies that had an impact on me was The Master with Philip Seymour Hoffman and Joaquin Phoenix. And at the end of that movie, because I got what Joaquin Phoenix's character was going through, I got what the director was trying to convey throughout the movie. Now, in essence, the short movie was inspired by Scientology. And when I told people you should watch The Master, what's it about? Well, I was like, it's loosely based about Scientology, but it's not about Scientology. You have to watch it. It's a character analysis of Joaquin Phoenix's character. And at the end of the movie, I got it. For me, and it got awards, and rightly so. But I came out of the movie, I watched this with Paul, and I said, I instantly get this movie. I understand. I understood it. And that was one of the small things when I mean impact. It can range in any genre of movies. Chinatown is one of them. Moonlight's one of them. It doesn't have to be these highbrow movies. The Dark Knight specifically could fit into that category of having a different impact outside of the realm of the small scope of being a superhero movie. I think it's much more than that.
Right.
So when I do say Angela Bassett shouldn't have won an award for her role in Black Panther, it's not because it's a superhero movie. I just didn't think her performance was that dope for me personally to be like, yo, I think you should win an award for that.
But judging by if we're gonna follow the logic of how films are judged for an Oscar, Wakanda Forever was a pretty good movie, but it wasn't prestige format. And so as a result, her performance while an excellent performance, it was incredibly moving, But if you judge it by the, you know what I mean? Like you're not going to judge an apple by the laws of an orange. So
it's not perfect. This is my own scope. So
sure.
You get what I'm saying? So like, was Black Panther a good movie? No. But that's neither here nor there.
Well, we're talking Black Panther or Wakanda Forever?
Wakanda Forever. Both of them. Okay. The cultural impact, it speaks differently. That's another case by case thing. That's a different story.
It was important to us, but in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, and also a good performance in an okay movie doesn't really beget an award.
That's a great point.
Like you could do, like, say for instance, Ant-Man 3 was not a good movie. Jonathan Majors, with what he had, actually did some interesting, cool stuff. I was like, oh, okay, I believe you. I'm not saying it's Oscar worthy, but I was like, oh, this is cool.
But that was a great performance.
But we also say this about Jonathan Majors. He either overacts for something that's too lowbrow or underacts for something that he should rise to the occasion. That's the Jonathan Majors problem. We discussed this part.
There is no middle with him.
Problem.
And
I
mean, personally, I didn't think that performance was great. I thought it was okay, but I think it was okay. But also the writing was very weak in that film. So I don't hold it against Jonathan Majors. I've seen him when there's strong writing and he's really good. Yeah. But that one in particular, it was like, they just dropped the ball in general from top to bottom. And he just happened to
he showed up for work.
Price for it. He just showed up for work. That was pretty much everybody. They everybody involved in that film were just showing up for work except Paul Rudd. I think he's the only one that was super.
But I will say
enthusiastic about it.
His performance does stand out though. Like he put in my mind, at least, there was a level of intensity that he brought to Kang that stood out above all the other actors in the film.
I would always say in Diamond's Hill, the last is his pivotal role. That's for me.
I think
that was his best performance as an actor.
Yeah, he was dope in that. I
don't know.
Most he did that was like I liked him in Lovecraft Country. I thought it was cool.
Yeah, he was good at that. Yeah,
but I think pulling back, that's what overall I think that's one thing where it's like you have these. Before, it was a mystical, magical way of how these movies would win. And you're like, who would get nominated? And da-da-da-da-da. And now that we're older, we kind of know how it is. And there's a little bit less of the luster. And it was interesting. I had to look up what sci-fi films that got nominated for like Best Picture, for example. E.T., District 9, Dune, Avatar.
It happens. It's not anti-genre film. It's, in fact, Alien was nominated for our Oscar. There are several throughout. Star Wars was nominated for Oscars. The first one, A New Hope, or when it was released, Star Wars. It was nominated for an Oscar. But it's like, again, what's so special about the Star Wars script? Well, I'll tell you. Typically, protagonist is introduced within the first 10 minutes. We don't meet Luke Skywalker till about 40 minutes into that film. That's the first time that we meet Luke. He did a bunch of setup that was very risky, especially at that time, for storytelling and story structure, in which he set up Luke's obstacle. He showed you what Luke was going to have to deal with, and then he brought us to Luke Skywalker. That's just a small example of why that script is canonized now. It's on the list of prestige, as you say, scripts that NYU and film schools on the graduate and undergraduate level will cite. These are the films that you study. These are the films that are top tier for whatever reason. Star Wars is other reasons, but mainly the biggest thing is the script. Now, that's ironic because it's George Lucas, but then he struck gold. Yeah, that's another discussion. But then he struck gold, and also he wrote that at a different time in his life, right? So he had already mapped out the story for the prequel trilogy, but he didn't have the details. And so later, when he finally made them, it's a different situation. So now his writing ain't as good. But the first one, he did a great job with that script. You can't take that away from him. And that's why it was one of the Oscar nominees at the time.
I was just going to say he wrote like the rent was due. That's all.
And that's so at 76, 77, so it probably was.
It probably was. And he was, about almost a decade out of UCLA, I think.
Yeah, I think he did what American Graffiti, was that the first one he did? Like,
yes,
that was the first one he did, but that was right out of school. And it's so crazy. The people involved in that film at the time were nobodies, but now they're all like for the last 30 years have been like
the things.
Mr. Mrs. whatever Hollywood, like Harrison Ford, for example. Like,
but yeah, I think overall, like it's one of those things, kind of like what Cam says. Like, I like that people enjoy the Oscars. I like that people win, and that's cool and all that. But I think the luster and that shine of it that you used to have was kind of just, it's kind of like, eh. And you when I was actually going through the wiki for previous winners for like Best Picture, and so I'm looking at the ones what won, and then two what didn't win, and it's like super interesting. It's almost more fun to see what didn't win as opposed to what did win. Because
the year that Drive Miss Daisy won, wasn't it the year that Do the Right Thing was nominated?
Yeah, I think so.
I believe so.
Or like, or things that you forget, right? Like, not Rocky was nominated for like 7 awards, I think, and it won 3. Like something, I was like, really? And then again, go back to watch Rocky. You're like, okay, this is cool, but is this
Rocky is dope?
Like, it is, but is it the same level?
First one was remarkable. Yeah, the first Rocky is amazing. I wouldn't say that about the sequels. They're good enough to watch, but I could see why they didn't win anything.
The same level.
First, no, they didn't. None of them did, but they were fun. But especially Clubber Lang, but that's a whole nother conversation.
And the point I was making is the same year that Rocky won is the year that Taxi Driver didn't. And so
wow, and that's very interesting because Taxi Driver is a much better film.
Exactly.
Way better film.
But again, at that time, even like I was going back, and there's just some interesting ones, like the year before, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest won, and then that was the same year that Dog Day Afternoon came out too, and Dog Day Afternoon is really good.
Oh, that's the era. You're seeing the era. That's all new Hollywood right there, baby.
Yeah, 70s.
That's like Bogdanovich, Scorsese, Coppola, Spielberg, Lucas,
Stanley
like
Kubrick,
that
all
first.
That. Yep.
Kubrick, like that first class coming out of UCLA and NYU, and like all of the film students, like that was all of their films. So that's one of the reasons why the Oscar built up so much prestige, is because you had those eras of where you had the new Hollywood directors and you had Spielberg, Jaws, and all of these different films that were very different in. Yeah, they were groundbreaking and they were very different in scale and scope. And so now, and they kept making films. Okay, you have Once Upon a Time in America, and then you get your Goodfellas, and so like this is like Goodfellas is like taking the Godfather school of thought to a whole nother level, and the storytelling about the mob is less romanticized and more nitty gritty, grounded this time. But that all those films you just pointed out to, like that's like straight up new Hollywood right there.
And for Driving Miss Daisy, I had to look it up real quick. It won for Best Picture. The other nominees was Born on the 4th of July, Dead Poets Society, Fields of Dreams, and My Left Foot. And like that's a pretty good like group of films.
So that wasn't the year. That wasn't the year.
Do the Right Thing. I'll have to look it up. But yeah. So to Cam's point, yeah.
I was gonna say, George, Lucas' first film is THX 1138.
Yes, that was his. Yeah,
Yes,
it was his college
that's
short
his
that got
first
expanded into a feature. Yeah.
Yes,
forgot about that.
THX starring Robert Duvall and Donald Pleasance. And if you don't know that Donald Pleasance is, Donald Pleasance was famous for being Dr. Loomis in Halloween, the trench coat wearing, revolver carrying therapist.
Right.
His therapist hunted him for movies.
I don't know. Maybe it was the 90s that kind of killed it.
Yep.
I'm like looking through it. I'm like, the 90s, I'm looking at just
that was the beginning. The 90s was the beginning. It didn't get dicey
until you started hitting like Dances with Wolves winning.
Okay, so hey,
the 90s is where it got ridiculous.
Okay, look, as a kid, I thought Dances with Wolves was just dope. As I got older, I understand fully why it's full of shit, that movie is. But as a kid, seeing what I thought was a documentary evidence, like, I was like, this is cool. Native Americans, white guy being friends with Wolf, I thought that was cool shit.
That was Kevin Costner, right?
Yeah, that was Kevin Costner. So when you find out how, like with anything, when you peel back a layer of the onion, you pull back the curtain, you find out how the sausage is made. It's a whole other ball of wax, man. Like, Dances with Wolves, the other films that were nominated for this in 1990 were Awakenings, Ghost, Godfather 3, which is better than people give it credit for, and Goodfellas.
Now, not that much better than.
I like it.
But that don't make it good. I'm just.
But Goodfellas is way better than Dancing with Wolves.
Yes, Goodfellas should have won.
100%. Good. Out of the films that you named, in hindsight. Now, if you put that in front of anybody today, this is 30 years later.
Yes.
Nobody would know anything other than Goodfellas, because that's just how much prestige since then that Goodfellas has gained. But there's no way that Goodfellas shouldn't have won Best Picture that year.
Ooh. Yeah.
But it didn't. But it should have.
Yeah, you're right.
But that was signs where it started to shake up. And I think
the slide
started the 90s.
Driving Miss Daisy was 89.
Yeah, but
I
90s.
remember when Malcolm X lost, but then in hindsight, looking back, I have issues with Malcolm X, but it got beat by what's the guy?
By Scent of a Woman.
Scent of a Woman.
Wow, that's right.
But again,
bananas to me.
At that time, I thought Denzel, if that was an Oscar-worthy performance by him in the movie,
it was. Even with the issues that movie, even with the edited version of that book, and because that's basically what that movie was.
I have issues with the book and the movie, but that's neither here nor there.
Yep.
However,
but as a project,
yes, I thought it should have won at that time.
Yes,
for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the kind of what, like, going back to what D'Angelo said to bring it full circle, is like there's a level of prestige of that films had, and like going through that list again, like you see it from the 60s to the 70s into the 80s, and then when it gets to the 90s, you're like, huh. And you're like, it's not that bad. But then you get to 2000, you're like, oh, Gladiator.
And then also think about the crop of filmmakers that emerge after the late 90s into the early 2000s.
Yeah, that's a good point.
One of them being often not named sapsucker that we talk about on this program. He emerged in the early 2000s and became what and ended up being so. I want to say that the quality of filmmakers began to decline in Hollywood after the 80s, and I think
in the late 80s. Right around
in the late 80s, right, the early 90s. I think it just became a thing where they Spielberg usually would win when he would do a film. So says it, because it just became like you couldn't ignore that the new Hollywood filmmakers just had the gift of gab at the time in terms of Hollywood. They were making everything that they tended to make ended up winning Oscars. Coppola only made in total maybe like 4 or 5 films. Was it?
And they all got and they all nominated too.
What's the one based Apocalypse Now? almost killed what's his name? Almost killed Douglas. No,
not Douglas.
Sheen.
Right, yeah. Martin Sheen.
Yeah, almost killed Martin Sheen, and they are all of them almost died.
He was the only one not doing lines on the film, doing lines of coke on the film. Everybody else was high out of their skull.
I mean, but they were like legitimately in Vietnam, though. Like that was like they were like in those conditions for real.
Wait, didn't they get like malaria or something?
Yeah, they got something.
Go. There's documentaries on it, man. And you know what's crazy is that it's.
I have the DVD. I have that special DVD.
You've seen it, then. So yeah. It's loosely based on Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which is a weird story in and of itself. And so all of these things started to plague that production to the point where they didn't think they would even finish. And so to the fact that he made it and then it became like this such Oscar darling. And it's one of those where you cannot watch that film and be like, "Oh, this was just political because Francis Ford Coppola did Godfather." Yeah, like, no, this is a great film. And just like the like the conversation I brought up Coppola to say he made only a few films, but with the exception of The Godfather 3, sorry, Josh, all of his films were like just amazing. And then also this recent one. I have seen this recent one that he did.
Metropolis.
That and probably after that, yeah, and then probably after that one, Bram Stoker's Dracula, which I love, but it was like it got nominated, but there was like loosely like, okay, that might have been his political nomination, right?
Yeah, really.
That was the one that he called a favor to because it's okay. Gary Oldman as Dracula. Come on, Anthony Hopkins as Van Helsing. It's okay, but it's not. It wasn't there.
So Peep Game in 1989, the other nominee. So Driving Miss Daisy won. The other movies that got nominated for Best Picture, and this is this is a really good list. Born on the 4th of July, Dead Poets Society, Field of Dreams, and My Left Foot, which Cam mentioned. Like, let's toss My Left Foot out of there because I don't think any of us know what the hell that is. Field of Dreams was a good movie. Like, it was a baseball. Like, it was as big a love letter to baseball as anyone could ever write. Dead Poet Society, you can say whatever, but okay, it fits in the category. Born on 4th of July was pretty good. But all of these movies are better than Driving Miss Daisy.
Also, what Driving Miss Daisy stood for, man. Come on.
Well, that's a whole.
That's a whole different story.
Yeah, it'll be hard for us to give that.
I was going to say
give that any kind of credence at all.
That up because we have our own rather earned biases. Let's call it that. When it comes to a movie like Driving Miss Daisy, and we know Morgan Freeman is capable of way better than what that film wound up being.
Also, Do the Right Thing only got nominated for 2 things: Best Supporting Actor, Danny Aiello, and then Best Original Screenplay.
Yes,
and that's back
so
when,
it actually didn't get a nomission for Best Picture.
No,
and this is back when Siskel and Ebert was like, "This is the best film of the year."
Mm-hmm. And what's funny is Danny Aiello was not too much out of character.
Exactly.
Let's not make it personal now.
No. This is people know he was not too out of character in his role.
But yeah, I would say
he's old. He's like old school Italian.
Yeah, 100%.
Like definitely. You can see Saul all over him, but he's had some pretty interesting things to say about when he in his interviews about working with Spike and working with the rest of the cast and how he felt about that whole story. And it was pretty. It's interesting to hear. Yeah, the subject matter. I had Criterion DVD years ago, and I got the 4K now. But there's a documentary where they're just them all of the actors meeting for the first time to do their table read. And it was so funny seeing a younger version of Giancarlo Esposito, like very much not confident or like very soft spoken, like introduces himself like very much well spoken, and all of them like just not even good. John Turturro, like he was like very like soft spoken and not looking people in the eye. It was just, you know, because we've watch these people in their careers grow and things like that. So it's interesting to see them at the beginning where they're just like, they came and auditioned when they heard that, you know, this young up and coming filmmaker, Spike, right out of NYU, had done School Days already, was casting for his big film. You know, again, that's just one of those special things that Blu-ray offers, but it's a cool thing if you're very.
Does anybody remember what
Do the Right Thing?
Sorry, no, not Do the Right Thing. Malcolm X. What year was that?
1990, I think. 91.
91.
Part of two. Maybe I was.
I was gonna say there was a part of me that wish I was around and in business when Spike was doing all his early work, to be a part of that crew. And like,
100%.
To make some magic. Because I look at all like the Denzels, the Wesley Snipes, Giancarlo,
Sam Jackson,
Halle Berry, like early Halle, like
Halle
all
Berry.
those, all those actors. And I think it just early New York, early
New York, early Brooklyn, specifically.
Yeah, the 90s,
early
man.
90s.
That's what 100% made me want to come to New York to pursue, you know, my film degree and all of that stuff. Seeing all of Spike's early work, like his depiction of, and also the Van Peebles, like Mario and Melvin, and Gordon Park, like all of them, like the way that they photographed New York was it just felt otherworldly. Like I was disappointed when I got to New York and it had been in the post-Giuliani era. I was like, why is it so clean? I walked out, I'm thinking somebody gonna try to mug me, man, and it didn't happen.
That I romanticize about that era of filmmaking in that world that Spike had painted for us. And I was like, man, that's just to be around the parties, the culture, the scene, the movies, the people. I just thought it was dope. And that's a moment in time. So
and also the fact that it ran parallel with and where things were with at that time as well.
Yeah, that whole era will never happen again. Like specifically that Fort Greene party era before Fort Greene became what it is now. that like those guys, all the Wesley Snipes, the Rosie Perez,
Rosie Perez,
the Spike Lees, all of those cats all hung out in Fort Greene. And you know, it's one of those things where like you don't know at the time, but like I have at least 3 or 4 people who were like, yo, remember that party that we went to and ... That was the party that they talk about in this thing, in this interview, where they were talking about this person was there, that person was there, that person was there, that person was there. I'm like, I remember that party very vividly. I remember a lot of beautiful people being there. But
you know what?
You could not have told me at the time that all of these people were in the same, like, drinking from the same punch bowl that I was
in the same room.
Exactly. You know, in the same room. Probably as broke as I was.
And you know, that's the kind of cool thing that I loved about living in New York City, not to push us into a different direction, but that was always the case. I remember, and this is after that era had been long gone. I was in Williamsburg, and it was after the Sandy storm.
Hurricane Sandy.
Was it Hurricane Sandy? Yeah. And so, like, all the power was knocked out, and me and my roommates and I, we ended up in a bar like down by the river, and a couple of actors from I think it was one of the Law and Order shows at the time, just kind of strolled in and just started drinking with us and like just chatting because they couldn't go anywhere. They were like renting a place down by the water, by the river, and everything had got stopped because of the storm. And so they were just like bumping shoulders with all of the people who lived in the neighborhood in Williamsburg, and which I didn't even live in that area. I was further, I think east maybe. But anyway, it's just to say that culture has always it exists in New York even still to this day. But I can imagine during that time, it was just like, wow, that was the peak of it.
Yeah. And you know what? I think I like that. We'll wrap it right there. We didn't expect to do a whole hour on Oscars and Oscar-ness, but I think actually is kind of a good thing. I think I enjoyed this conversation better than actually watching the Oscars.
Well, yeah.
No doubt.
was the pod about nothing?
Oscar edition. No, the title's going to be We Don't Care About the Oscars, but we care about movies.
No, don't do that.
Yo, man, we need the clicks. Oh, yeah. Like and subscribe. Be on YouTube now, Spotify, Apples, Amazon, all the things. This is Blerdlines, and we're out. Peace.